All right, so Chuck, we have this plane crash, this death of Prigozhin, and it wasn't really, I think, a surprise to a lot of people. I mean, still shocking to see a plane blown out of the sky, but I think at this point, people are not surprised when this happens to someone who opposes Putin. So what's the fallout been here? What can we expect to see going forward in both Ukraine and Russia in the wake of this?
I don't know that it has a huge impact on the war in Ukraine in the short term. In the long term, it takes these Wagner fighters, many of them, off the battlefield, and they were really the only ones who were motivated and well trained, that were fighting. So it has given the Ukrainians a break in that sense, and we have seen since I was there. Just a couple weeks ago, we've seen the Ukrainians really start to gain some momentum on the battlefield and start to break through Russian lines, especially down in the south near Oryiv, where I went down with Operation Blessing and spent the night when I was there, let's see, back in October, November timeframe. So that part of the front lines has been broken now. And if the Ukrainians can capitalize on that and actually stabilize that line, that really makes it difficult for them to resupply any place south of whatever area that they can reach with their HIMARS missiles and that sort of thing.
All right, so you were just there, and I'd like to dive in and talk a little bit about what you're seeing there. I mean, I know you just gave a little bit of an assessment there, but it is a year and a half now that this has been going on, and it's starting to have that feel of like a never-ending war. And you're talking about them potentially being able to break through here. Is there an end in sight in this thing at all possible, or is it just a matter of Putin's just going to keep throwing stuff at the wall and keep applying pressure until he either gets what he wants or it just is completely obliterated and has nothing left? What's going on here? What's going to happen?
As usual, this thing will likely be decided not on the battlefield, but in the halls of power.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, both Russia and the United States kind of have this idea that we should just stop helping and stop funding the Ukrainians and thereby snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. We could give Ukraine what they need to win this war. In the long run, Russia is waiting to see the results of the election, and they're pouring the majority of their efforts actually not into kinetic operations on the battlefield, but into information operations in the United States. They're working very, very hard to convince Republicans especially that they need to pull out of Ukraine, that they need to stop funding Ukraine, because that is the only way that Russia really has a chance of winning this thing. The Ukrainians, I talked to the president's advisor while I was over there last week, and he made it very clear that if the United States were to pull its forces, that Ukraine's not going to stop fighting, that they would go to a general mobilization, a full mobilization of their people. See, right now, they're not fully mobilized. They have about 750,000 troops under arms, which is very, very good. And it's about 3 times what Russia has got on the field right now. But if they had to, they could mobilize up to 5 million men, and that's not including women. And they would mobilize everybody that they could get to go out to the front lines and start fighting this thing, because they are not going to give up their country anyway, anyhow. I think that if the United States were to pull out, that the rest of Western Europe might step up their efforts to fill that gap, although it's a pretty big gap. And really, it would not take more than about 10 or 12% of our 1-year annual Pentagon budget to give Ukraine what they need to actually win this war.
Yeah, and you're talking about the election. Of course, we just had that debate last week, and it's interesting to see this fracture within the GOP, Chuck. How you have it started out as let's support Ukraine, and then as time has waned on, you've had some prominent voices sort of questioning that and saying, "Hey, why are we sending funding over there?" and presenting this what a lot of people are saying is a false dilemma. That essentially, you can't fund them and support our own border here at home. which,
No, but we can absolutely do those two things. And in reality, if we're giving our military, this is what people, I think, don't quite understand. They don't understand the small scale of what we're actually doing in Ukraine. When you compare it to the Pentagon's annual budget, which is nearly $1 trillion this year, $1 trillion, we could give $100 billion to Ukraine, and it wouldn't hardly make a dent in the U.S. military budget. And so we've only actually given about 70 billion to them so far. We've pledged more than that, and most of that money, however, doesn't actually leave the United States. That money goes to pay American companies that are producing the weapons, that are producing the ammunition to send to Ukraine. So it's helping to create U.S. jobs. And so it's U.S. taxpayer money that's eventually going for the benefit of Ukraine, but the vast majority of it doesn't leave the United States. We get this false dichotomy about the corruption in Ukraine, and I just want to say, have you noticed American politics lately? If you want to talk about corruption, let's talk about the United States corruption, and let's not try to foist that corruption or that idea of corruption on Ukraine. While I was there, President Zelensky fired all of the regional heads of the recruiting command trying to recruit soldiers for the conflict, because there were guys that were paying bribes to be able to get out of military service. They found out, they fired everybody, and they started over from scratch. That's called addressing corruption. That's called doing something about it. I would love to see somebody in the American government do something that drastic about the corruption that we all know is prevalent inside the United States government. And so, again, the Russians are pushing very hard to try to convince the American public that it's not worth it to send this money. I would say that it is. With the little amount of money that we've sent, $70 billion, we could, look, that $70 billion has diminished the Russians' combat capabilities by about 50%. It's crazy to think that people are so convinced that $70 billion is not worth spending when we're talking about A, the moral component of doing what's right, standing for people that are being persecuted, and B, living up to our commitments. This is a question that I ask people all the time when they come at me with this argument that we shouldn't be giving money to the Ukrainians. I say, well, so are you saying that America should not live up to its previous commitments? We should not live up to the treaties that we have made with our allies? Because that's what you're saying. If we are to back off and let Russia take over Ukraine and then come for NATO, that we would be sending a very clear message to all of our allies and our adversaries that America cannot be trusted. And if you want the whole world to think America cannot be trusted, and you want Russia and China to set the rules of order in the new realm of the global politics, then yeah, pull out of Ukraine and see what happens. I guarantee you that's not going to be better for America. And whether or not we could spend enough money to secure the border, it would take, President Trump wanted $5 billion the wall on the border. $5 billion is a drop in the bucket. We don't need $70 billion to secure the border. We just need the will to secure the southern border. We just need to take the handcuffs off of our border patrol, and they could do it. They could secure the southern border. So it's a false dichotomy for sure, and I think people would be appalled if they came to understand just how much many conservatives have been affected and influenced by Russian propaganda operations operating in the United States.
Yeah, really interesting, and it does seem like if you just take that stance and, well, let's pull out and Russia's not our problem, well, eventually they will be your problem one way or another, because they have That's a desire right. to expand their power and expand their reach, and they will do that if they sense that we're out of the way, so and that we're just hands off, and so you're going to have right. to deal with that.
Do you want
problem.
America to be a force for global good in politics, or not? If you don't want America to be a force for good in global politics, then yeah, pull out, be an isolationist, pull out of the entire global order, and just see what happens. See how the world collapses into chaos. And again, you look at what Vladimir Putin just did to one of his adversaries. He blew him out of the sky with an anti-aircraft missile, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it, and he doesn't care. Okay, if somebody like that, you want somebody like that setting the rules in global geopolitics, maybe it's worth $70 billion to keep that from happening.